Macy.
My name's Camille. I'm she, her. And I've been with this church community since 2020. And I was raised in the Unitarian church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I want to welcome you, whether this is your first time to our church or you have been here for a lifetime. This is my first time delivering a sermon, and you are in for a something. You will learn my humor is very dry, and that is not a mystery, but our theme for this month is mystery, and I will be discussing a difficult topic, which can be very mysterious, and how we find understanding through even the more difficult things to understand. But let's first open. So this is a story that many of y'all probably have heard. It is The Monster at the End of This Book by Grover. Well, not by Grover, but starring Grover. And it's a story about misunderstanding and how misunderstanding can bring fear. And sometimes if we just keep walking forward, we'll find that there really wasn't that much to be afraid of in the first place. So thank you, Camille, for reading this story for us.
Yes, I'd like to invite anyone who's young or young at heart to come and enjoy and read this story with me. Yeah, come on up. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you on this beautiful day. All right, so this story is called The Monster at the End of This Book, starring lovable, furry, old Grover. The monster at the end of this book. Okay, I promise. What did that say? On the first page, what did that say? Did that say there will be a monster at the end of this book? It did. Oh, I'm so scared of monsters. That's right. Shh. Listen, I have an idea. If you do not turn any pages, we will never get to the end of this book, and that is good because there is a monster at the end of this book. So please, do not turn the page. Oh, no. You turned the page! Maybe you do not understand. You see, turning pages will bring us to the end of this book, and there is a monster at the end of this book. But this will stop you from turning pages. See? I am tying the pages together so you cannot. Watch me. You turned another page! You do not know what you're doing to me. Now stop turning pages. I don't know if I can resist. I have to know. I'm turning another page. There. I, Grover, am nailing this page to the next one so that you will not be able to turn it. And we will not get any closer to the monster at the end of this book. Bing, boink, clonk, boink. I think I'm pretty strong. I think I can do it. All right. Do you know that every time you turn another page, you not only get us closer to the monster at the end of this book, but you make a terrible mess. Well, I kind of like making messes. Do you? Oh no, look, I did it again. This will stop you from turning pages, a heavy, thick, solid, strong brick wall. I would just like to see you try to turn this page. She will. Do you think I can? Yeah. Say, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Do you know that you are very strong? The next page is the end of the book. And there is a monster at the end of this book, and oh, I am so scared. Please, do not turn the page. Please, please, please. Do you think I should do it? Yes. Do you think I should do it? Well, look at that. This is the end of the book. And the only one here is me. I, lovable, furry, old Grover, and the monster at the end of this book. And you were so scared. I told you. I told you there was nothing to be afraid of. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. All right, well, thank you all for reading this delightful story with me. If you will please help me sing the children to R.E.
And here's our blessing. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A prayer commonly heard in recovery communities, but before we can ask, we must be willing to ask. Willingness is the beginning of change. Prayer is often the manifestation of willingness. One of the first prayers those 12-step recovery are taught is keep me sober today. Then at night to pray, thank you for keeping me sober today. Both express willingness to be sober. The 11th step is a step of continuous prayer and meditation. Often 12 steps continued to use the St. Francis prayer for the 11th step. Grant that I may not so much as seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. Seeking understanding rather than being understood is the hallmark of serenity. Notice I never said what we were praying to, who we were asking, because it does not matter. All that matters is that we're willing to ask, willing to seek, willing to understand. And today I ask for your willingness to understand.
My name is Camille, and I'm an alcoholic and addict. Y'all can say hi, Camille. It's fine. My sobriety date is December 7th, 2002. And I'm going to go over the welcome I wanted to do at the beginning of our service, but then decided we have little kids in here, and I didn't want to give y'all any conversations in the car on the way home that you might not want to hear. Because we're talking about a hard topic. But like I tell my kids all the time, we can do hard things. We can talk about hard things. So welcome to everyone, regardless of your addiction status or lack thereof. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion which honors and respects all paths to truth and healing. And we often listen and keep an open mind to other theologies other than our own. And we discern what we want to keep and what we feel like is not helpful on our own personal paths. And I credit the 12 steps and the continued support I find within and outside of 12-step fellowships, such as this church, to my recovery today. Today I am 21 years sober. I had a decade-long career in mental health field and was a substance abuse counselor before I became a stay-at-home parent. I also have a degree in philosophy with a concentration in religious studies and psychology from LSU, a public university. And I'm a cradle Unitarian, and I, like I said before, grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I just kind of want to give you all that overview so that you know I'm not completely insane. Today I'm going to give you a little window into the hardest of the 12 steps that many you use, agnostics and humanists and so forth and so on, deal with, and that's the first 3 steps. However, it's worth that I note that there is other paths to recovery. For instance, the Satanic Temple provides a program specifically for atheists, and the Refuge is one for people who find the Buddhist path to be more comforting. In 12-step literature itself will say that they do not have a monopoly on recovery, just like we UUs do not say that we have the only path to truth and meaning. I chose this topic because addiction is a very common issue. According to the CDC, 16.5% of our population over the age of 12 suffer from a substance use disorder, and 94% of them will never receive treatment. I need to say also, in my former professional opinion, that if you have loved someone in an active addiction, you may possibly be suffering from addiction yourself. And I say this just to let you know that if you're that person, I see you, and recovery is also available to you as well. So let me get right to the point and work from there. I believe the 12 steps are an inclusive theology if applied as intended and interpreted properly. Despite the triggering language of the 12 steps, you can still find useful things to borrow from the theology the 12 steps provide. There's a good argument to be made that anyone can benefit from working 12 steps regardless of their addiction status. The 12 steps, despite popular opinion, is not a support group. It's not. It's not even a therapy of any kind. The primary purpose of the 12-step fellowships is to help others achieve recovery. And the steps, I believe, and literature supports, that they are a theology that has a prescribed process with the goal of creating a spiritual experience that brings about recovery. And that can be triggering, that spiritual experience part. But I'm going to argue that understanding is an experience. Have you ever had like that, oh, I get it moment, right? That's an experience. Like, we even have terms for that, like eureka, or in spiritual terms, an epiphany. So that's not an uncommon thought. I think we tend to, I tend to place a lot of value on empirical evidence and ignore the anecdotal evidence. But the thing is about anecdotal evidence, which is based on experience, is that does apply to me. My experiences apply to me. Now, I cannot apply my experiences to you. I cannot apply my anecdotal evidence to you. And I definitely should value and look at empirical evidence, but let's not throw it all away. There's value. So, paths to understanding. One of the things we do a lot when we're looking for understanding is looking for commonalities. Sometimes, like, if we can find a commonality to someone else that's on the opposite end of something that we can understand, it can be a bridge for us to experience that understanding, if we can relate to them. One of the first things I was told at my first 12-step meeting, before I even walked into a room, right outside the hall, was this person came to me and said, listen for what you relate to, grab onto that, and leave the rest. And that advice probably saved my life. I need to give a disclaimer about 12-step communities so that we can respect and honor them. And during this disclaimer, I want you to listen for the commonalities that we have with them. There's plenty. So this disclaimer is based on the 12 traditions, which 12-step communities use as a covenant for these communities. They love their traditions, and we love our covenants. The last two of the 12 traditions state, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need maintain anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. They love their principles, and we love our principles so much we're working on an 8th one, right? We also have with them in common a lot of personalities that probably wouldn't get along very well if we didn't have our covenants. And they also have that kind of natural thing that's drawing them together that kind of gives them personalities too. They definitely would not stay together without their traditions. What these traditions they're saying is that I'm not an authority on the 12 steps. I'm not a spokesperson for them because there is no spokesperson or authority on the 12 steps. Not even the man who wrote them was a formal authority on the 12 steps. They don't like their authority, neither do we. So when quoting 12-step literature, I will use the name of the author and not the work. I will use terms like 12-step fellowship, in the rooms, or meeting, or program when referring to a recovery community, rather than calling it by its name. The only time I'm going to be using it and then its name is if it's in a quote. And I want you to remember, if I'm quoting, taking it out of its original context and placing it in my own. The other commonalities we have with these 12-step communities is that they love their committees. They love their coffee. And in fact, all 12-step meetings start the same way most UU fellowships start, and that's with a coffee pot, at least 2 people, and a resentment. One of these principles is inclusivity, and it's given in the 3rd tradition, which states the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Just a desire to do so. There's no dues or fees. There's no statements of faith. We can relate to that. Just a willingness to stop. That's the only requirement. So let me introduce you to the writer, Bill W., an alcoholic New York stockbroker living in the 1930s, who wrote the 12 Steps with the help of others. For their time, they were trying to be as inclusive as possible, despite their only vocabulary accessible to them was surrounding the spiritual, was heavily influenced by the Christian Bible. Bill W. got sober with the help of another no longer existing group called the Oxford Group. However, it is clear Bill's aim was inclusivity. He did not recover until he was invited to pick a God of his own understanding. And then he felt these principles should be shared with everyone. So he went to Skid Row and invited the unhoused to join the Oxford Group meetings. And the Oxford Group meeting responded by inviting him to create his own recovery community. From there, these spiritual principles were codified into the 12 Steps, and the first 12 Step was literature was published with the intention of being able to share these principles with the entire world, even women after some debate. Bill W.'s writing stands as evidence in his attempt to make spiritual recovery inclusively accessible, the most glaring of which is the 3rd step itself, which says, as we understood him. But I could not get past step 1. Step 1, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I could admit unmanageability. The whole reason I was forced into a room with a poster like that on the wall was evidence that my life was unmanageable. But that was everybody else's fault, not mine, or at least that's how I felt at that time. But powerlessness was not something I could admit. First off, I didn't understand, and I still don't understand, to be honest, how admitting powerlessness empowers you. That makes no sense intellectually, logically. But the thing is understanding is not an intellectual exercise. Sure, logic can be a bridge for us to understand things, but it's not required. Acceptance can happen without understanding, but often understanding does not happen without acceptance. Have you ever met somebody who just refuses to understand? I think we all have. I was a fundamentalist, humanist atheist raised in a Unitarian church. And admitting powerlessness was not acceptable to me because it caused vulnerability, now looking back at it. So I was paired with a sponsor, who's someone who takes you, mentors you through the first 12 steps, through the 12 steps. And I let her know right away that I only believe the scientific method. It has to be proven by a scientific method if I'm going to follow any of it. And she said, "Oh, that's good. I can prove you're powerless. Can you control gravity?" And I said, "No, of course not." And she said, "Okay, so you can admit you're powerless over something. Let's start there." Then she pointed to the literature, and in the literature it says, if you're unsure if you have a substance abuse disorder, you should try some controlled drinking. It says, go over to the nearest bar room, try some controlled drinking, try to drink and then abruptly stop. Try it several times. And I was like, great, a repeatable experiment I can do. So I went over, I tried that, and my hypothesis was I'd be fine. What I actually found was that I was insane. And here's why I consider addiction insanity. I was insane because once I consumed a substance, I didn't know what was going to happen next. I had no control over what would happen next. And then I learned over another period of time of continuing these experiments that a lot of times I could not even take Nancy Reagan's advice and just say no. So now I realize I cannot control myself consuming a substance that renders me powerless. Even now today, if I were to consume a substance after 21 years, I was 19 when I got sober. Obviously, it's possible it could just be a phase. But knowing the risk, that would be an insane thing for me to do, to consume a substance not knowing what my risks would be. So I'm insane. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's step 2. Was I willing to understand this step? Not really. But my sponsor then asked me, can you accept a theory? Oh yeah, I can accept the theory of evolution. So that to me meant that I needed to have a theory about God that's as solid as the theory of evolution, and I had the ego to figure that out. So I set about trying to figure out God and drawing upon some experiences I had with fungi, and went to my sponsor to tell her my theory, and she listened to me for a while and was patient, and then she eventually was like, let me interrupt you. She lost her patience, and she said, listen, you don't have to believe anything. You just have to be willing to believe. And obviously you're seeking because you're trying to explain it, so you're already willing. Congratulations, you're done. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, what should I believe in? And she said, well, in the literature it says Alcoholics Anonymous does not demand that you believe anything, only that you're willing to believe. A lot of times people use something else that they can understand. Like, here's a group of people, a 12-step fellowship of people who have recovered. They've done what I am not able to do. I could place my faith in them. They could be my higher power for the time being. There's a chapter in literature called the chapter to the agnostic. They had us in mind when they were writing this stuff. And it said, God is just a tool. It's an interdependent relationship. The example they use is electricity. Think of all the things we've done this morning with electricity. With the throw of a switch, we've made coffee, you can hear me talking, all of these things, and yet I can't exactly see electricity, I can experience electricity. Prefer not to. But I don't have to understand it or experience it for it to be there. I don't even need to believe it for it to exist. And the thing is, we may never understand, but we must stay willing to understand. And if we can do that, there's always the possibility and opportunity we can experience willingness. Even if we think we do understand, sometimes we don't. And usually what happens with that misunderstanding is we're not teachable. We're not willing. So we have to stay teachable to stay willing. So what do I do next? Well, understanding is an action and experience. Willingness manifests into action, and action is an experience. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? And that's what I'm going to tell you. Thank you for being understanding. You are being understanding. It's an action. And I missed my place. There I am. I'm on step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. How do we act out understanding? Well, that's whenever I was told by the lovely people in 12-step communities to act as if. Fake it till you make it. Faith without works is dead. I was told, just do the next right thing, trust the results. Vulnerability again. I was told, go to any lengths to stay sober. I was told to pray, like was said in our meditation. Prayer is a manifestation of willingness. If we're praying, then we must be willing. Just think about that. If I'm praying for something, I'm already willing. But sometimes, does that mean if I want willingness, can I pray for willingness? Yes, you can pray for willingness. And yeah, this sounds like some kind of psychological trick or a placebo effect. One time I was having a biopsy done, and before they did the procedure, the person was using a cold spray, and then he said to me, this stuff probably doesn't actually work to numb you. It's probably a placebo effect. And I'm like, could you not tell me that? Like, I don't care if it is a placebo effect. I still want it to work. So who cares as long as it works? And then you may say, this sounds a lot like brainwashing. And that's if you say that in a meeting, they will tell you, maybe your brain needed to be washed. So again, dry humor and being accused of a cult, something we can relate to. So is that it? Well, eventually there's a spiritual experience. And the appendix says, a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, personality rearrangement, is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. Most of the time, these spiritual experiences happen over a long period of time and are intellectual. Much like if you've ever read William James' Variety of Religious Experiences, he's quoted in 12-step literature often for that work that he did. The other kinds that are a little bit more rare, or actually pretty rare, are what they call a burning bush experience. And that's when it's sudden and emotional. It's the kind that Bill W. describes in his story, and it's the kind that I had and didn't even realize that's what I had until I was 10 years sober. So I'm going to give you that story, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a trigger warning. I'm going to try and keep it as light as I possibly can and vague at those points. So I was Grover. I did not want to move on to the next page. And it was because I was feeling vulnerable. Working the steps was making me feel very vulnerable. So I decided to try some more controlled drinking, some experiments. And because I was driven by what they call in literature 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. And when I used again that time, it didn't provide me the relief that I was accustomed to receiving. And I felt completely in despair because now my solution isn't working anymore. And I'm standing at a balcony and I'm looking down, but then I looked up. And when I looked up, the sky was this like bright blue and hot pink clouds because it was the morning. Morning was coming. But it looked absolutely amazing and beautiful. And it wasn't like a burning bush experience or a lightning bolt. It was more like a sigh. And this thought ran through my head, there's a solution. And I started to think about all the people I had met at these meetings that when I listened and related to them, they were talking about despair and hopelessness and powerlessness. But then they were standing in front of me happy, joyous, and free. And the thought occurred to me, if I just do what they did, maybe I could have that too. And that was worth the effort of walking away. And then I looked at my Nokia phone. That's how long ago that was. And it glitched. How weird is that, a Nokia phone glitching? And all my phone numbers had erased. And the only ones I could remember, so of course all these phone numbers of people who did not have my best intention were gone. And the only ones I could remember were family members and people I'd met in the rooms that I had been dialing frequently over the past few days. And I made a plan with them, got on the phone with them right there, and made a plan to change my environment to be more conducive for my sobriety. And that's what happened. And so what does my personal theology look like now? Well, I still don't have a name for it. Me and this thing, we have a lot of nicknames for each other, but we're not really on a government first name basis. It's a practical theology, meaning every day I can use it. It changes and grows with me. It gets customizable to the situation that I'm in. And I can be vulnerable with it. My understanding is that I still don't understand. And I guess that makes me agnostic. I am still a humanist. I am still a Unitarian Universalist. But I'm not a fundamentalist. And if you need a higher power, you can borrow mine until you find your own. That's fine. And I want to leave you with, when we seek understanding rather than to be understood, we can face all mysteries. Sometimes it's just turning the next page or doing the next right thing. And I'll leave you with the 9th step promises, which comes directly from literature. It's not my favorite promises. My favorites are actually the 10-step promises. But these are the most popular because they illustrate what sobriety can look like so well. It says, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things, and we will gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them. statistically likely that someone struggling with addiction has heard me today. Remember that I consider those who have loved or have loved someone in active addiction to also be struggling with addiction. So what would I impart to them? That there is a recovery that works. There are people who have recovered in many different ways. That seeking those people out is evidence of willingness, and willingness is all you need. Sure, many quality resources greatly help, but the only thing that is needed is willingness. For the few that this advice is not intended for, I would say yes, this advice applies to you whether you realize it or not, because we all struggle. But also I would impart the advice to be willing to understand, even when we know we may never understand, we should still find the willingness to do so. If we all sought to understand others more than seeking to be understood, we could really make good changes in our world and community. Understanding brings empathy, compassion, education, solutions, resources, or at the very least, demolishes self-centeredness and fear. One thing that those with addiction have suffered for too long is stigma. Addiction has been addressed as a moral failing for far too long, forcing those who need help to look for it blindly in the dark, while those who have recovered and have solutions and can help, often having to hide for professional, social standing, misunderstanding, and other reasons. With that, I will ask those who have recovered from addiction and who are comfortable with speaking with someone about their recovery after the service to please raise your hand. Awesome. Thank you for raising your hand. Thank you for your bravery, willingness, helpfulness, for keeping me sober today. And did you think for a second I would not ask you to raise your hands? That's an inside joke because that happens at the end of every meeting. We also rely on those professionals and lay people for help and resources. Our church would not fulfill its purpose without pastoral care team. They are always here for you. Please reach out to them if you need them at any time. If someone you know is struggling with addiction, or you just have questions or concerns or just curiosities, please talk with me, a recovered person who raised their hands, or pastoral care after the service. They are inviting everyone.
Well, that's...
Yes.
I'm they.
You are they.
I am they. If you would like to stay after service and have a discussion, or you would like some support, I am here. Camille's going to hang out too, so just so you know, that opportunity is here after church. How's that? That's
Perfect.
That's less we told a bunch of people to do something that doesn't know it, and more it's me. So
That's it. That's all.
that's so what?
That's so what?
So what?
So
Awesome.
what?
Thank you. I want to just say so what. Thank you to Camille.
Y'all have now been thoroughly warned about taking classes with Mandy.